All right, welcome EDU 202. Jonathan Higgins here, coming to you live from my children's playroom. No, I'm not at the beach. I wish I was. Unfortunately, I'm home with my daughter. She currently tested positive for COVID, but the rest of our family is negative, so we're holding in there, and we are masked up and wearing our N95 masks and so forth. So we are taking precautions to protect ourselves. So I am home with my children, so if they pop in, I apologize. But I'm going to walk you through today, kind of the PowerPoint that I was going to bring you through today in class. Wanted a lot of class discussion tonight. So some of that will be done using something called Flipgrid today. And then also, I do want you to do a quick journal article and then, just a journal response. And then what I'd like you to do is to do a discussion post at the end. So this video will kind of serve to provide you some background into the content that we're looking at. And then again, I'll go over those assignments and what exactly I want you to do while we work our way through. So if you would, hang with me. Again, welcome to EDU 202. This is the Introduction to Child and Adolescent Development. So we are looking at the Introduction to Educational Psychology this week. And this week we were going to go very quickly through Chapter 1. I am also going to post a very short reading quiz for you guys, so I'll link that in as well. I almost forgot about that, but I will link that in for you guys as well. It'll be on Canvas and just something very quick and easy to take. And then I also actually have another Kahoot that's embedded in the PowerPoint that I'd like you guys to do as well. So again, welcome to EDU 202. These were our introductions from last week. I'm going to go through those once again to try to start learning names, but it is difficult, of course, with the mask on and not being able to see everyone's face. So that'll take some time, of course, and as large of a class as we have. But I encourage you as well to visit the Google Doc presentation link here, as well as post it to Canvas prior and reintroduce yourselves with everyone. One of the things I was going to start with in class was really what you know about teaching. What are some of the characteristics of a good teacher? How do students learn best? And I really want you to think about a lot of these things as we walk through our curriculum and our content tonight. Also, I want you to think about what role research plays in education. I am in the process of, as I've told you guys, working on my EDD in curriculum instruction. One of the classes I'm currently in is a class, it's called Practitioner Research 2. So in this course, we're going to do a study of our own. So we're going to develop a study of our own. We look at how to conduct practitioner research, which is research in the classroom. We're going to conduct that. We're going to gather data on our own and in critical friend groups. We're going to go over that data, analyze that data, and really basically write a mini dissertation for this course in preparation for the major project. So I do want you to think about what role education or what role research plays in education. And then also who should be making decisions about educational policy. And that's a big one. It's obviously been a big one for many years now, but it continues to change as our political climate changes. We do see certain people making decisions about education that may not know a whole lot about education. And I think that's really important for us as educators to be able to read and analyze research and be consumers of research, whether that be quantitative or qualitative research, and know the limitations of the research, but also know the applicability or the transferability of the research too that we're reading. So all that stuff is what I want you to really think about tonight as we go through some of this. And as we progress, and then also reflect on that in the discussion posting that I ask you to do later on. Your textbook is really separated into major principles or ideas, and I will kind of gloss over some of the stuff because I know you guys have read. Hopefully everybody's read chapter 1. If you haven't, you got a little bit more time. But principle 1 in chapter 1 is, an in-depth knowledge of students must drive teacher decision-making. So principle 1 here, the main idea here is that, we really need to know our students. And if you looked at my Flipgrid, one of the biggest things that I find makes an effective teacher is somebody who's compassionate and somebody who cares and shows their care and concern for their students. So I do think it's important that teachers have an in-depth knowledge of their specific students, where their students are coming from, what background their students are coming from, what challenges their students face at home, what abilities they have, and so forth. And as we see here, that affects all sorts of things from planning, instruction, to creating effective classroom environments, how well you know your students, to creating effective assessment, an assessment that is accurately assessing your specific students. The second principle here, a second main idea to go along with your curriculum for chapter 1 is the effectiveness of various classroom practices can best be determined through systematic research. And as I said before, research is really key to being a good teacher. When we think about research, we think research as being this idea that it's an overwhelming dissertation that we have to do. And that's not practitioner research. Practitioner research can be something as simple as identifying a problem of practice in your classroom and adjusting your instruction based on that. Last year, a psychology teacher, the other psychology teacher and myself, came up with a problem of practice. We wanted to investigate how to better suit our students' needs and their understanding of studies in relation to the components that we were teaching in class. So what we did is we had our students work in like cooperative learning groups to create outlines of the studies and short videos of the studies, and then actually teach the studies to the entire class. So we did kind of an active learning or problem-based learning activity for our students, and we measured our student success through surveys and student acquisition of knowledge through surveys to see if these actually helped them, if it had an overall positive effect. And this was actually for my first practitioner research course. So again, systematic research, when I say that, don't think that you need to look up an article on something and find somebody that's been published or find something that's been peer reviewed. This systematic research can be something that's done in your classroom as well. So one of the key points here as well is that common sense and logic do not always provide accurate information about how people learn and develop. We can be mistaken on how we learn. I've got a wonderful history teacher who, for quiz corrections, makes his students rewrite the question and answer 5 times if they want a C, 10 times if they want an A, something like that. And that type of rote memorization, while it does have a place in some cases in learning, overall, we know through research, through systematic research, that that's not the best way for someone to learn. So while we may think we have these ideas on what's best and how best we learn, common sense doesn't always tell us the actual story there. But also we are looking at, how to help students succeed and how to help them be successful in our classes. And again, we rely on research at times to provide us those foundations and those ideas. We also look to psychological and educational research findings as objective sources of information about teaching and learning. So again, less than the anecdotal, rather than looking at the anecdotal, well, I do this and it works for my students, that may be great. But what does the research say? What is the research that has been conducted and utilized time and time again? What does that say about how students learn? All right, so those are the 2 major principles. For some reason, I thought there were 3 in there. 2 major principles of our instruction surrounding this unit. And I'd like you to think about at this point, how should your instruction be delivered? And I'd like you to think back on your own educational experiences of being in a learner-centered classroom or being in a teacher-directed classroom. The learner-centered classroom approach, not necessarily where the learner has full control over the classroom and control over what's taught and what is learned and so forth, but that the learner is at the center of that. So every activity that I design, everything that I do, from the assessment to the instructional activities to the support structures I put in place, all of that is designed around the learner and with the learner at the center of that and the focus. Whereas, our teacher-directed classroom, maybe more teacher-directed activities, maybe more of your sage on the stage approach, your more lecture-based approach. And here you can see just a chart that has some of the ideas related to teacher-centered and learner-centered instruction. So chapter 1 really does go into the big ideas of educational psychology here, and some of the big ideas of educational psychology. I'm not going to read them aloud to you because we will hit on these further along in the PowerPoint, but you can go back and look at some of these. Again, a lot of it's based on research and enhancing your professional knowledge and the learning process and making sense of our information. Now, before we go any further, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to click this link here, and I'll post this link to our Canvas page so that you guys can see and play the Kahoot. And you know, this is kind of an interesting survey. If you've read the book already and you've read the answers to the survey, it may not be all that unique for you, or it may not be such a great learning experience. But this survey does help us to really understand what the true research says about common misconceptions that we may hold for education. So take the survey, play the Kahoot if you get a chance. If you already read it in your book, I hope you learned something new. And I'm going to move quickly through that. All right. Opening our class tonight, ideally all this stuff would have been done in the first night of class, but we had such a large class that we didn't get through our introductions. But opening class tonight, I really wanted you to think about something you enjoyed in, you know, either tonight's class or last night's class or the first week of school. So I would like you to reflect on, you know, many of you are freshmen stepping into a college campus. I want to know what was your experience like? So again, just journal that, and maybe we can share that when we're together next week as well. All right. And the next, because we are looking at, and I'm not going to ask you to do this, you don't need to do this as well, but I am going to ask you to journal later on how you learn and how you study. So that might bridge that gap. But I want you to think about how we learn information. Did you have to learn anything from a class this week? And you can of course summarize our class last week in 20 words or less. That is a learning strategy, summarization strategy, but you don't have to do that for this week. There's our third principle. That's what I was looking for. Research can provide quantitative information, qualitative information, or both. And I am learning a lot about that in my program right now. That yes, many of us want to draw conclusions off of quantitative information because we find it easier to generalize. Quantitative research yielding information that's inherently numerical in nature. Can be reduced in numbers. And again, from that, we find it easier to generalize that information. Or qualitative research, where we're more focused on an in-depth examination of a complex phenomenon. Many of our case studies, many of our observational studies, field notes, interviews are all qualitative in nature. And qualitative is great as well. In fact, in my EDD program, about 95% of all of their dissertations are actually qualitative in nature, which I found to be interesting. I always thought quantitative was the gold standard when you're looking at educational research, but it's really not. Qualitative is important as well, even though it doesn't have the ability to be generalized as easily. It does also have transferability into another classroom situation. So you can take ideas, and I think that's a big part of being a consumer of educational research, that I want you guys to be able to take ideas and say, hey, that's really great. That might work in an ESE classroom. Can I also apply that to my social studies classroom? Can I also apply that to my English classroom or to my ASL classroom? So that's the concept there. And I think that's really the big one that we should focus on. So what type of research is done in education? You guys have hopefully read the book about quantitative and qualitative research, and we'll talk more about this as we go along. You can go over some of this, and of course there's mixed methods research as well, which is kind of a combination of both, and many people use mixed methods as a way to get around the idea that qualitative is not as scientific. There's our principle number 4. They keep growing. Sorry guys, I did look this over and missed some of those. But principle number 4, different kinds of research studies lead to different kinds of conclusions, whether it's a descriptive study, which is only simply describing a situation, or a correlational study. And we'll explore all of these a little bit more in depth later on and look at relationships between two different variables. Experimental is your traditional study in which you're manipulating a variable. So that is your controlled study, where you have a treatment group and a control group. You have your independent variable and your dependent variable. Anybody remember which the independent variable is and which the dependent variable is, or which one is manipulated and which one is, reflected in that change of the variable, the changed variable. So I won't give you any hints away on that, but we will talk more about independent, dependent variable and experiments, and then quasi-experiments as well later on. There's your descriptive studies, basically describing in nature, correlational studies, exploring relationships, and we kind of talked about that. And there's a video there that you guys can click on. I'll post all these links as well in Canvas for you so you can see that. But again, looking at class grades and achievement scores, that video is kind of a fun one on the correlation, on a number of different correlations. My favorite is the correlation between appliance ownership and safe sex. So that's your question for the week. I want you to think before you watch that video how appliance ownership and safe sex are correlated. Okay, that's an important one. So think on that. And that right there is the key to life. All right. There's some more correlations. We can see examples of a positive correlation. As you see, school achievement and self-esteem. Those with high self-esteem are likely to then have high school achievement. Or a negative correlation would be, errors in answers and response timing to questions. If you have a long response time, you're likely to have fewer errors and so forth. That's a negative correlation. An experiment, as I talked about before, it looks at the independent and dependent variable, a highly controlled study where we are changing something. If it's highly controlled, hopefully there's only one independent variable that we are changing. So for instance, time studying, do students spend more time studying or less time studying? Students who spend 10 minutes a day studying as compared to students who study no minutes per day. And then your dependent variable is going to be your average scores of the two groups, okay? That is looking at a strictly controlled experimental design experiment. You might even look at things like GPA, instructional programs and GPA, or standardized test scores, or look at things like standardized test scores. And actually a lot of colleges, including Flagler, I believe, are going to test optional or non-reporting for SAT, ACT scores as a result of finding a lack of correlation between test scores nowadays and college success. Quasi-experimental study occurs when research can't really control for all potentially influential variables. So there are a number of variables that we do try to control for, but then not all are able to be controlled for. Principle 5, research can be done seamlessly integrated into teachers' ongoing classroom practices. I do think that's one of the most important things that I want you to take away from this, is that you too can be a researcher. It is important for us to revisit and reflect on our practice. In earlier Flipgrids, it actually makes me think, in earlier Flipgrids I've done for this class, one of the most important things that I find to be or to make an effective teacher is someone who is reflective in their teaching. I think that's truly an important component of being an effective or an exceptional teacher, is somebody who is able to reflect. And I think teacher-based action research is a major part of that. Learning how to utilize different instructional strategies in your classroom and being okay with failure in your classroom is a very big part of you growing as an educator and as a teacher. So here's your major components to action research. I'm going to have you guys watch a video in a moment as well that talks about action research. And what I'd like you to do while you watch that video is I'd like you to just jot down the major steps to action research. And principle number 6 here, moving right along. There were a number of principles. I apologize that I forgot how many principles were associated with this. Principle number 6, drawing conclusions about cause and effect relationships, requires that all other possible explanations for an outcome be eliminated. So, we're getting into the difficulties in research and in isolating variables and really getting down to the difficulties of the ability of whether or not we can truly establish a cause and effect relationship. In order to truly establish a cause and effect relationship using research, we really do have to have random assignment of participants. You need high levels of control in your participants. And again, that correlation, even though something correlates, does not indicate that there's a causation. And I want you to think back to my safe sex appliance ownership example there. Even though there's a correlation, does one necessarily cause the other? I don't know. Principle number 7, theories can help synthesize, explain, and apply research findings. So from research, from these ideas, from these studies, we then combine these ideas into theories. And from that, we create this integrated set of concepts and principles designed to explain a particular phenomenon, and we continue to test that. So, in research, as opposed to a layperson's view, a theory is not a guess or a hunch or a hypothesis or a speculation. It is based off of these ideas, these sets of concepts or principles, again, to which we're describing a phenomenon. Whether it's, I'm trying to think of a number of theories that I teach in psychology, like attribution theory or social learning theory. So these ideas or these theories come from psychological research that has been done, in which someone is now bringing this information together and determining how, or predicting how people will act or interact as a result of specific behaviors. So descriptive correlational experimental research leads to the development of theories. Again, that research that is replicated and that is proven to be true then does in turn lead to the development of those theories. So here you can see the difference between principles and theories, some other key terms in your first chapter there. Principles describing the specific effects of certain factors on other factors. So it's basically telling what factors are important here. So the major principles, the ideas of this text, for instance, are telling what factors are important in educational research, whereas the theories are telling why these things happen and leading us to have predictive behavior. Information processing theory is, one that we study in psychology, looking at attention, and attention being essential to the learning process. It's just based off of this simple idea, again, that has been demonstrated in research, but the students are more likely to learn what they're more interested in simply because they're paying more attention to what they're supposed to be learning. That is the idea here of information processing theory, and that's a theory that didn't just come out of thin air. That's a theory that has been demonstrated multiple times in research. So continuing on, now that we've looked at research, we kind of shift gears and we look at developing as a teacher. So as a teacher, what are you looking to be? What are you looking to get out of the world of education? And how do you hone in on that? And how do you change that? Because it's one thing to, I've had coaches and met coaches when I was coaching swimming who coached the same way for the last, 30 years. They get to the pool deck and they tell the kids, all right, go swim, 3,000 yards. And that's great, but that's not keeping up with the innovations of coaching. Are there things in learning that change? Are there things in psychological research over time that change, in education that change? Yes. One of the problems with education is that we do find every 10 years or so, something is kind of repackaged, put into this nice box with a big bow on it, and said, hey, here's the new blank. This is going to revolutionize the world of education. And in some cases it does. In some cases it's a great idea. In other cases it's the same thing repackaged, just sold as a new thing, new idea. But in either case, at times what that serves to do is it gets people who are stagnant, who do fall into that trap of doing the same thing over and over again. It gets them to that point where it drags them out of that comfort zone and causes them to do something else, to change. So effective teachers continually work to enhance their professional knowledge and skills. And some of the strategies for developing those knowledge and skills you can see below here. Obviously learning your subject matter, learning the culture of your school, being reflective, as I said before, in your teaching, communicating and collaborating with your colleagues. We have something called professional learning communities now that we utilize, and our schools in St. Johns County in particular are very big into this concept of professional learning communities. All of us having common formative and summative assessments in our classes, all of us having common unit plans and lesson plans. So we're all teaching similar ideas and building off of one another. That's one big part of my wife's job as the elementary literacy coach for our district office. She goes out to schools and she's working with teachers right now on this new program, and she is working with teachers and teaching them how to utilize this new program in their classroom. So, teaching is about innovation. It is about taking what has been researched and applying that to your current situation and integrating that action research. All right. So what does action research look like in the classroom? This is a quick video I want you to watch. Again, I'll post all of these links in the Canvas thread so you don't have to find them in the PowerPoint. But as you watch this, I would like you to just jot down the steps to action research that somebody goes through here. Again, it doesn't have to be all that scientific. I just want you guys to see how you can use this in your own classroom or in your own context, your own personal context. The next thing I want you to take a look at here, and this is your second activity that I really want you to do, truly the first real activity that you're going to submit for me, is I would like you to go on this Flipgrid. If you go to flipgrid.com/Higgins6100, again, I'll put the link in our in our Canvas announcement for you guys. I'm sorry, my son is yelling across the house. I'll put this in Canvas for you guys. If you go to that, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just think to yourself, and you can see my video I made. It's only a minute long. That's all I want. I did give you a minute and a half to use, but only a minute or so long. And I'd like you to, you're gonna have to sign in using your Flagler email address. I don't know why it's not allowing me to use the password anymore. There's the password if you guys can figure that out. But I think right now, unfortunately, it's just forcing me to put in your email address. So you'll probably have to put in your Flagler email address and you'll be able to post. It is a video, so you can talk. There is a closed captioning function there as well that we can click on if you hear somebody like me who's mumbling. So if you would go on there and post a video response. I want to see who you are, you know, and for many of us, all we know is the masked bandit that's in our class. I am not by any means suggesting that I do not believe in the masks or do not think that they are worthwhile. Believe me, right now, more than ever I do. But it is nice to see your face sometimes too. So anyway, if you would log on to that Flipgrid and you can of course type. You don't have to speak it in there. If you're an ASL or a Deaf Ed major, you can sign it for us. If you do sign it for us, please type a little blurb below so that I know what you're saying. Otherwise, I'll have to get my wife to interpret for me. But yeah, if you would, most certainly go on there and tell us what you think makes an effective teacher. Just 2 or 3 qualities, and you can see my example for you. All right, so some of the qualities that make an effective teacher that come from your text, at least, look at the ability to develop relationships with your students. Look at being patient and caring and having a kind personality, having knowledge, true knowledge of your specific learners, a dedication to teaching, and with that, engaging for your students and engaging your students in learning. And this was interesting. This was from your book. That globally, survey participants did not focus on how much a teacher knew or even what kinds of methods he or she used, but instead on the teacher's dispositions and ability to build relationships. And sadly, I will argue that that has what's gotten me to where I am in my educational career. You know, I'm a talker, I'm a lecturer, as you know. I always want to do more, and I'm always very reflective in my teaching and say, man, I should have done blank, or I should have done that, or I should have done that differently. And I'm always trying to reinvent and relearn things. But I will say my compassion for my students and my care and my enthusiasm, I think, has gotten me far, regardless than what I even knew in my subject matter. So I'm not saying that I don't know anything. I have taught psychology for the last 10 years, and I've taught this class for 3, and taught other college classes before this. But I will say that that definitely helps a lot. All right. So again, some other links here. The Stanford link no longer works, but I did search it, and you can see that. And I'll walk you through those links after this presentation. The Georgetown link is still there if you want to see what they determine to be an effective teacher. There's also something known as the Teacher Behaviors Inventory and the Marzano Instructional Framework. And I'll walk you through those very quickly, I suppose. I'll even show you those links. Let's see. Move that down a little bit. So we can drag this to the bottom. And then you can see here. So here is the Center for New Designs in Learning and Leadership. You can see some of the top qualities of an effective teacher here. So as you see, many of those are just qualities of an effective person, but they are necessary for teaching in today's educational climate. And then here's that other teachingcommons.stanford.edu website that I was sharing with you, where again, they don't have the effective teacher. My link is bad, but you can see here, there are a number of really cool things on the Teaching Commons webpage here that shows you different articles, different resources for teachers. And I'll show you a number of these different resources as we go along and move our way through this class. All right, let's see. There are some of the YouTube videos that I have pulled up for you guys, and the Flipgrid as well. I'll go back to that Flipgrid so you can see mine here. The Flipgrid, when you pull it up, you might get into, I think you'll get into and actually see my other students. So if you want to see my group from last year, you can see what they said was an effective teacher. And then you can see mine here, the qualities of an effective teacher, my first posting there. I'll share with you also very quickly those 2 other documents I told you I was going to share. This one is the Teacher Behaviors Inventory, I was given this in my master's program to evaluate college professors, and I do think it's an interesting way of looking at, what are some things that you think are really beneficial or important for teachers to be in their classroom, and then what are other things that aren't really that important. Obviously, that I am big on the enthusiasm aspect. I am also big on the interaction aspect of it. The organization in my classroom takes a little bit of a little bit of time to get used to, but I will tell you that with my new job, I've become very organized in not only my teaching but also in my daily life. Pacing, disclosure, speech, so you can look through a lot of those things and see what you deem to be important as a quality educator. The last thing I want to show you here is the Marzano Art and Science of Teaching framework. This is called our learning map, and this is what we use at St. Johns County to evaluate. Administrators will actually go in and evaluate teachers based off of this Marzano learning map. So they have a number of design questions, and they're involving different things like routines, addressing concepts, things that are enacted on the spot. And then also here, domains reflected based on planning and preparing, reflecting on teaching, collegiality, and that's going to be where that PLC process or professional learning community process comes into play. So you can see, what are some of the most important characteristics here. If you were an administrator, and I'd like you to imagine yourself as an administrator going into a classroom, what are the 10 most important things that you would want your teachers to be doing? What do you think are the most important things out of this? In fact, what I'd like you to do, if you would, I'll figure out how to, I don't want to add too much to your plate here as I've already given you a few things to do, but I'll figure out how to make maybe a Padlet or something where you can write down the numbers of the ones that, just the numbers of the ones that you think are the most important, and we can share that and talk about it next week. All right, going back to our PowerPoint, we're almost done, guys, I promise. I know I've talked for a very long time, but looking at, now moving into, so we've looked at research, we've looked at, what are the qualities of an effective teacher, and now we look at the strategies for learning and studying effectively. So, how do we learn? How do we study? This is the journal activity I was going to ask you to do. So if you would just, I'm going to actually open up I'll open up a Padlet for this as well. Making a note to myself that I just ask you to journal, how you've learned something recently. Have you actively engaged in studying for a class this past week? What actions did you take to study for a class? So just take a few minutes and do that. It can be a flowchart concept map of how you learned to do something like riding a bike, swimming, reading. It could be something from when you were 5 years old. That's fine. Or something more recently. So I'll post a Padlet for you guys on that as well. And then as we move into that, I want you to focus on yourself, but I also want you to think, what can you do in your classroom to help your students fully understand the material? Will you relate the material to your students? Will you consider what new information comes in that might contradict your own personal beliefs or ideas? That's a really important one, as it is important as an educator to be open and to be willing to change. But it is difficult when we come across information that challenges or contradicts our own beliefs. And how do we teach that? How do we come into information that contradicts our students' beliefs? And how do we then instill these new ideas or beliefs onto our students? How do we tie these abstract concepts or principles, these things that are not easy for us to understand, then to concrete examples? And I think that's another thing as an effective teacher that I think is paramount, is being able to take something that's abstract and then pull it in and apply it to something in your classroom or something in a student's personal life. How do we elaborate on things? How do we check ourselves to make sure we remember and understand what we've read? Do you have reading checks as an adult or as a student as you go through? How do you ensure that you're getting the most out of your studying? Some of the strategies to use before studying, and I think these things are things that you as college students can even do. There is merit to this as simply as a college student. Sorry guys, I'm trying to drag this out of the way for you. Study at times when you're mentally alert. I know I'm most alert from 5 in the morning to 6:30 in the morning. I don't know why. That started with my leadership stuff, or not my leadership, my curriculum stuff, my EDV. And as a result, that's when I get up and when I do my best work. I select an appropriate environment for studying. Usually I sit outside in the quiet. Sometimes I sit in my children's playroom in a quiet environment. At Flagler, I used to go up to the second floor of Proctor Library and find one of those little rooms and close myself in there for hours. Be realistic too about how much you can effectively learn and remember at any one time. I used to be that guy who would sit in there for 2 hours straight and I get probably 20 minutes of solid studying out of it. That's a waste of time. Be realistic about it and set goals for each study session and return to it frequently. All right, strategies for during your study session, obviously paying attention, but relating new information to your existing and prior knowledge is key here. And I think that's important for you, again, as a college student, but also for you as you go out forward as a teacher, is being able to take that information, those abstract concepts, and tying it to your own existing knowledge or tying it to your prior experiences. Organizing that new information using visual imagery or charts, elaborating, like I asked you to do the flow chart or to journal your experience of learning something, elaborating on what you read, and then summarizing your work, whether it be in 20 words or less, or be summarizing in one sentence. This video, if you're not familiar with the Chrono Note Maker guy, this is a wonderful, I really like the guy. I can't tell you, that I use Cornell Notes in their exact format here in my classroom, but I will tell you that Cornell Notes do have a very high success rate because the Cornell Notes encourage you to, number one, review the information, number two, question the information, and number three, summarize that information. So there are a number of steps involved in this Cornell note-taking process that you're going to see here. I would like you to watch that 12-minute video, and again, I'll post that link for you. That will really help you, hopefully serve to help you. And again, you don't have to do Cornell notes exactly as they're shown here, but as an adult learner, I would strongly encourage you to summarize information, to ask questions periodically as you're studying. We're not going to go on our Flagler database tour. We don't necessarily need that yet, but I will do that at some point this semester to kind of walk you through as you guys are freshmen and give you an idea of, largely freshmen anyway, and give you an idea on how to navigate through the Flagler College database so you can look through educational journals and find research, and how you should research for your writing assignments. This one writing assignment, our next writing assignment, does not have any research associated with it. Okay, it is a job recommendation paper, and it's not due until September 16th. I'm sorry, the deadline on there said September 5th. That is not correct. It is September 16th, so you do have some time, so don't stress it. But if you want to get a head start, that assignment is posted in there and all of the instructions for it as they are on here as well. And I'll talk about this more next week too, so don't stress it. You do not need to move ahead in this by then. And there's your general rubric for writing assignments. Lastly, this is the last thing I do want you to do because we don't have class in person tonight, is I would like you to answer the discussion. This discussion post is on Canvas, and I will open it up for you guys. And I'll post it again to our announcements there. And it asks you to describe an effective teacher you've experienced. So taking your Flipgrid idea and what are the qualities of an effective teacher, but now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to actually describe an effective teacher you've experienced and 2 or 3 qualities that make them effective to you. What about them has stuck out to you, and how or why have they left an impact on your life as an educator? One of the people that left a key impact on my life, and the guy who actually encouraged me to teach, one of the people was actually Dr. Williams, who is the department chair for this program. But another guy, even prior to Dr. Williams getting me interested in education, was my comp teacher in high school. And I think I told you guys about this. He would ask us to write about the static on the TV or write about broccoli and things like that. And just a very unique, eccentric person who really, truly had a passion for writing and a passion for what they were teaching. And his passion stuck out to me. And that encouraged me to be a teacher and be excited about my own curriculum and content. So I'd encourage you to do that as well. And that is about that for our class tonight. As I said, I will go on Canvas and I'll post all of that stuff for you guys so you can see everything. I don't think there's necessarily any other announcements or anything that I have for you. I'll post all the assignments and all the links into Canvas for you. Again, I'm sorry I can't be there today. I'm kind of devastated about that, obviously, because my daughter has COVID. But more so, I am devastated that I can't be there with you guys for your second class. There is no class tonight. You do not need to show up at the building. Our class is asynchronous, virtual, so please go on here and just do the things that I ask and be ready for class next Thursday. I look forward to seeing you then. Have a wonderful, wonderful week ahead.